When I started playing it, I didn't expect it, but Grand Soul Story took me on a trip to the past made by someone who really created a love project. And this just proves to me that most of the time, working on what we like only improves the quality of what we do. Grand Soul Story is an RPG that pays homage to old games of the same genre on the SNES. When I received a PR email about the game, my instinct was to reject it, since it was around that time that I abandoned JRPGs. I'm still not the biggest fan of turn-based battles, but at that point I reached the peak of my disdain for the combat system. I didn't like the mechanics, I didn't like constantly making multiple options, and I never got along well with some of the rock paper scissors methodologies that were routinely included. Now, when I look coldly at that abandonment, I believe that this was not the only reason, but a wider set of more or less transversal factors closely associated with the potential of each console, which ended up not allowing many of the quality of life inclusions which we are now accustomed to and which gradually brought me back to the genre. Inclusions that Grand Soul Story does not offer, which makes its charm even stranger. I already had some nostalgia for this faded and even confusing pixel art that seems to transform all the characters into kids with giant heads, a kind of Funko Pops made by one-armed people in the dark, but which fits so well with the revivalism that this game conveys. I feel a little torn about the soundtrack and sound effects. On the one hand, it seems like it would be more thematic to be completely in 16 bits, on the other hand, the mix in which it is found is clearly better than if it were that way, but it makes it a little out of touch with everything else, even if that doesn't interfere minimally with the game. In fact, I have to admit that it even makes it better. The game is made by just one dev, and some of the sound effects seem to have been recorded by a sound recorder with him doing that action. These are sparse moments, but very noticeable when they appear. The same happens with the writing, which often shows many oral signs, dialogues that don't work or that are just funny in our heads. But all of this was of very little impact on the course of the action, which is very well timed and progresses simultaneously in several plans in a tending but not completely cohesive way, where I have to highlight the evolution of relationships between the elements of our party. Dialogue options seem to suffer from the problem of illusion. I didn't test it in all the dialogues, but I tested it sporadically and, in essence, the different options led to the same final result. And even when they don't, they put us in a position from which it is difficult to get out of. So, we will have to repeat that dialogue until we choose the right options. Just like in the past, Grand Soul Story has us doing several fetch quests to earn money. But the important thing is not the way to carry out these actions, but the reason for doing them. Something that the game does well is this. Even though it is repetitive at times, it is not so in terms of motivations. This desire to always have the story moving forward produces some ridiculous situations, where it leaves us talking about events that we shouldn't know about just because we eventually choose the wrong order of the missions. And it's very easy to choose missions wrongly. As expected, Grand Soul Story's mission scheme is confusing. We have a diary that shows us the missions we are involved in, but it doesn't show us where we are in their resolution or even if they have already been resolved. And considering there is so much to do, I already feel quite lost at the point in the game I find myself at. In a way, we are led to places where we can go, but just for a while in the beginning, because the game is difficult and we can only defeat a handful of characters at that stage. However, over time, we evolve and end up, depending on the items we are willing to invest, holding out in almost every battle, and that fact helps a lot with that feeling of losing track of the situation, since we can go almost any way we want. The map also doesn't help us much since it doesn't exist. It's true that the overworld is small and each of the areas, in turn, is also small, but it's easy to lose track of where we are going, and where a particular store or seller is, which led me to have to take notes in a notebook as if I was playing Elden Ring. With an orientation system based on cardinal points, if I were to ask to change just one thing, it would be this: allowing better orientation within the missions, being able to select one and know where I have to go, and not having to look northeast of the trash can in the back of an alleyway. The dev tries to create some moments of doubt, offering situations in which we can help someone or cause them harm, even if just emotional, for our personal gain of course, but he doesn't succeed very well in that, nor is it easy to do so in these games. Here, and although I've not finished the game yet, there seems to be no long-term reward, with the gain being very immediate, something like either we win an item or we earn currency. I'm almost done with the text and I haven't talked about the battles themselves yet, but only because the important thing about the game is the adventure, not the combat. We can use a party of up to 4 elements. We have the option of changing the elements that have different skills, but as soon as I found my favorite formation, I stuck with it. In each turn we can choose between using a physical attack, a skill, or using an item. The item can be used on our team or on enemies. Each enemy is more susceptible to a damage type and, likewise, more likely to use a damage type. The constitution of our team can offer tools to better defend ourselves and attack each of these strengths and weaknesses, but we don't know them in advance. We always have to discover them. Each fight is a dynamic and moderately fun process for someone who, like me, doesn't particularly like it. From time to time, we manage to avoid a fight either through dialogue or through the use of stealth, a mechanic that translates in a somewhat strange way with this pixel art, but which exists in the game. Something I wish I could do was to be able to quit a battle immediately. We often get into fights that we realize immediately we can't win, but that we can't get out of in any way, and we have to stay there until our team is completely defeated, something that can still take a good few minutes. Grand Soul Story is a pretty good game. Good not just because of the surprise of having been made just by one person, but actually quite good. Granted, is not at the level of Sea of Stars, for example, but that's not what it intends to do. Grand Soul Story aims to pay homage to RPGs from the 1990s and, in that aspect, it is capable of doing so almost perfectly and with much more content than expected. An easy recommendation for lovers of the genre. See you next time, guys. Bye!